So let's get on to the next great plan that Bernie Sanders decided to address, and that is climate change. And he, of course, supports the Green New Deal, which is something that the Green Party initially put out, and it's also something that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has championed. A lot of people, I've seen some people that say, I think even the Green Party may have said it, but they're saying that, AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's plan is not quite far enough. So potentially, maybe Bernie Sanders is, maybe his plan, hopefully, hopefully it's going to be accepted by people that are in the Green Party, that are are kind of within the very, very progressive leftist movement. Because Bernie Sanders, as much as he's on the left, obviously he's not like a communist, right? He's not a socialist. He's a democratic socialist, and social democratic socialist. So he's a lot of people are take issue with him on foreign policy and stuff like that. But hopefully they can come to accept his Green New Deal idea. I think Bernie is a big believer of pushing policies that are very very progressive, very far left, so that you don't, there's no middle ground, right? We covered a story where he gave a speech and he says, I'm not in no middle ground, I'm not in favor of any middle ground, so he wanted to put forth the idea that he's not going to concede and just push for things that are just kind of in the middle. You do it as far left as possible, and then the middle ground ends up being maybe center left, right? So I think that's a good way of operating when it comes to being a progressive and being Bernie Sanders. So so he also has another page that he addresses the Green New Deal here, and so it says the Green New Deal, and let's see. The first part says the climate crisis is not only the single greatest challenge facing our country, it is also our single greatest opportunity to build a more just and equitable future. But we must act immediately. And then he just kind of gives a short introduction here. And then I'm going to read you a bunch of the kind of bullet points here he has. So first he says, as president, Bernie Sanders will avert climate catastrophe and create 20 million jobs. And then the next part says, reaching 100% renewable energy for electricity and transportation by no later than 2030, and complete decarbonization by 2050 at least. At the latest. Ending unemployment by creating 20 million jobs needed to solve the climate crisis. And he says it's going to be good paying union jobs with strong benefits and safety standards in steel and auto manufacturing, construction, energy efficient retrofitting, coding, and server farms, and renewable power plants. He wants to directly invest in an historic $16.3 trillion public investment towards these efforts. A just transition for workers, so obviously people that have been working in other forms like coal mining and whatnot, he wants to transfer them over to that, and he's going to offer them housing assistance, job training, healthcare, pension support, 5 years of workers' current salary. The next one says declaring climate change a national emergency, saving American families money by weatherizing homes and lowering energy bills, building affordable and high-quality modern public transportation, providing grants and trade-in programs for families and small businesses to purchase high-efficiency electric vehicles, and rebuilding our inefficient and crumbling infrastructure, including deploying universal, affordable, high-speed internet. Next one says supporting small family farms by investing in ecological, regenerative, and sustainable agriculture. Justice for frontline communities. Commit to reducing emissions throughout the world, meeting and exceeding our fair share of global emissions reductions, making massive investments in research and development, expanding the climate justice movement, investing in conservation and public lands to heal our soils, forests, and prairie lands. And it says this plan will pay for itself over 15 years. And that's according to many experts that he apparently is spoken to, and he says they have scored it, and said kind of scored it and its economic effects. Next part says here, let's see. It says he wants to transform our energy system to 100% renewable energy and create 20 million jobs. He says, as president, I will transform our energy system away from fossil fuels to 100% energy efficiency and sustainable energy by 2030 at the latest. Didn't you already say that before? Build enough renewable energy generation capacity for the nation's growing needs. We will end greed in our energy system, build a modern smart grid, weatherize homes. Yeah, I already said that part. Electrify homes and businesses. Phase out the use of non-sustainable sources. Regulate all dangerous greenhouse gases. Declare a climate emergency. So yeah, it's kind of a repeat of what he said before. When it comes to transportation, he wants to fully electrify and decarbonize our transportation sector. Give grants to purchase a new electric vehicle. That's good. Vehicle trade-in program. So he wants to trade in electrical vehicles for like the regular kind of vehicles that we drive right now, obviously, that are more, that, you know, obviously put more CO2s into the atmosphere and everything. Electric vehicle charging infrastructure, which I mean, if you're in California, for example, you see a lot of those around. I see charging vehicles all over the place wherever I go. So it would be great if that's in every place, pretty much. He also wants to give $407 billion in grants for states to help school districts and transit agencies replace all school and transit buses with electric buses. That's good. Replace all shipping trucks. Ensure the decarbonization of the transportation sector. Build public transit that is affordable, accessible, fast, and resilient. Build regional high-speed rail. Retrofit dangerous fossil fuel infrastructure. He wants to also put money to research and development, which involves drastically decreasing this cost of energy storage. Invest in decarbonizing the shipping and aviation industries as soon as possible. Establish a nationwide materials recycling program. Reassert U.S. leadership in research and engineering by marshaling resources across the federal government and institutions of higher education, including the National Academy of Engineering and National Science Foundation. The next part says he wants to use the power of international leadership. He wants to lead the world in fighting climate change by investing in reducing emissions throughout the world. Invest in the Green Climate Fund. Bring together the leaders of the major industrialized nations with the goal of using the trillions of dollars our nations spend on misguided wars and weapons of mass destruction to instead work together internationally to combat our climate crisis and take on the fossil fuel industry. He also wants to rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement and enforce aggressive climate reduction goals. That's something that President Trump obviously withdrew from like an idiot. Renegotiate disastrous trade deals to protect the environment. Now, as you know, some of you may know, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is the longer name of the TPP, as many of you guys may know it, the TPP, it had a provision in that in that Trans-Pacific Partnership that said there's corporations. So big corporations that run like fossil fuel plants and, a lot of the places that basically let out emissions, CO2s and stuff, greenhouse gases into the climate. Those corporations can actually sue countries if those countries don't want those big corporations and those toxic chemical, CO2, emitting, companies and power plants and stuff to let out those emissions. They want to, if the countries want to stop them from doing that, the corporations can actually sue the country and allow them to exist, still exist in those countries. So, and then that Trans-Pacific Partnership, it's basically like a tribunal. It's like a tribunal court. And then that court is all stacked with the heads. So not so much the heads, the corporations, but the people that are, friendly to the corporate interests that, want those, essentially those, those gas companies and, those kind of companies that are letting out all those emissions to exist. So they're in favor of them existing, but those are the people that are running the tribunals that go and fuck up our climate, fuck up our entire country, our world, essentially, not even just the country, obviously, just the whole world with their, fucking horrible CO2s and, gases going into the air. That's what the TPP allows. So it allows the corporations to sue countries so that they can remain in those countries and continue doing what they're doing. It's ridiculous. So that's something Bernie has spoken out against. That's something that Bernie, he's going to put an end to here, as he says, as he explains here, which is really good because the TPP is it's ridiculous. It's horrible. And so, yeah, it's absurd that ever existed. And I'm glad that Bernie is going to focus on that as well. And he's also, called out NAFTA and normal trade relations with China and whatnot. So that's, he's always been anti-trade, and Trump claimed he was anti-trade, but he was an idiot, and I don't know, he probably wanted to sell out more to the big corporations, basically, and because he wants to get back into, he wants to do like a NAFTA 2.0 and get back into the TPP and sneak in provisions in there from the TPP and NAFTA and stuff. So Trump is he's obviously gaslighting that issue. Bernie says he also wants to end overseas fossil fuel financing. Next one, he says he wants to invest in resilience and justice. He wants to create a climate justice resiliency fund, rebuild America's crumbling infrastructure, repair the nation's water systems, build resilient, affordable, publicly owned broadband infrastructure, which is basically internet access and communications, increase funding for roads, repair freight and passenger transportation networks. By the way, just so you guys know, our infrastructure currently gets a grade of D-, so D or D- somewhere in that range. So, I mean, Bernie is the only one that's, happy to address this issue, while all the other politicians are just hedging and just pretending to claim they want to help that issue, but they really don't. The next one says build the $7.4 million affordable housing units to close the affordable housing gap across the country and guarantee safe, decent, accessible, affordable housing, repair and modernize public housing, retrofit our public infrastructure to withstand climate impacts, adapt to sea level rise, which is a ridiculous problem right now, obviously. Increase funding for firefighting to deal with more frequent and severe wildfires. I don't know if, obviously, I think everybody's heard about it by now, but the Amazon rainforest is just, it's engulfed in flames right now. So that's a terrible, development that is happening with our climate. All the different, I forgot where it was. It was a very cold weather region somewhere. Where was it? I think it was Greenland, or maybe Iceland or Greenland. It's like totally melting. It's melting to the point of like it's creating rivers where like all this water is like traveling through like all these different parts. And it's just like getting rid of all this obviously ice, and then it's all turning to water, melting into water essentially. It's amazing. Next part says protect community cohesion, which references after Hurricane Katrina, many of the residents, 24%, almost a fourth of the residents in New Orleans, many of them low-income families and people of color, evacuated the city and were never able to return. So they were basically left homeless on the streets after Hurricane Katrina. And I'm sure that's happened with a lot of other hurricanes too. Hurricane Sandy and Hurricane Katrina, obviously, and then many other ones. It's so hard to keep track of all these hurricanes that have destroyed our destroyed our country, different cities and states. Next one says increase investments in the hazard mitigation grant program. Apparently that's something that's part of FEMA, and that it helps mitigate damage from future disasters. So that's good. Conserving our public lands. He wants to invest in green infrastructure and public lands conservation by reinstating the civilian conservation Corps, fully fund the Land and Water Conservation Fund and our National Park Maintenance Backlog. Next part says he wants to end the greed of the fossil fuel industry and hold them accountable. Make the fossil fuel industry pay for their pollution. Prosecute and sue the fossil fuel industry for the damage it has caused, create a national climate risk report, implement sanctions for corporations that violate our domestic climate goals, end fossil fuel subsidies, keep fossil fuels on public lands and the ground, ban offshore drilling, end all new federal fossil fuel infrastructure permits, require fossil fuel corporations to repair leaking infrastructure, including natural gas and oil pipelines and drilling sites. Clean up old and abandoned fossil fuel infrastructure, ban fracking and mountaintop removal coal mining, ban imports and exports of fossil fuels, divest federal pensions from fossil fuels, pressure financial institutions, universities, insurance corporations, and large institutional investors still invested in or insuring fossil fuels to transition those investments to clean energy bonds through executive action. Place a fee on imported carbon pollution intensive goods, accurately estimate the climate impacts or benefits of all legislation proposed in Congress, focus the federal government's resources on transitioning to a 100% clean energy economy. And the last part here is rebuild our economy and ensure justice for frontline communities and a just transition for workers. For workers, he wants to ensure a just transition for workers. And I think that's kind of in relation to how, a lot of workers are, working as, it says working as coal miners and oil rig operators. He wants to transition them to go and work for the, clean energy corporations and industry and whatnot. So he wants to expand the jobs in those parts of the, those kind of jobs, essentially. He wants to require strong labor standards, provide employees with tax credits to incentivize hiring transitioning employees, invest in workers and deindustrialize community economic development, protecting the right of all workers to form a union without a threat or intimidation from management. When it comes to economic development, he wants to provide targeted regional economic development. He wants to invest, he wants to put funding, $5.9, almost $6 billion in funding distributed for Appalachian Regional Commission, Delta Regional Authority, Denali Commission, Northern Border Regional Commission, Southeast Crescent Regional Commission, Economic Development Assistance Programs. And then he also wants to put infrastructure investments for impacted communities. So he said, like the headline says, a just transition for frontline communities, ensure an inclusive, comprehensive process from start to finish, follow environmental justice principles, ensure the full and equal enforcement of all environmental, civil rights, and public health laws, and aggressive prosecution of violators. Let's see. Yeah, so, it's a very long list. It's much longer than I expected it to be. But, you guys basically get the idea. Bernie Sanders is making sure he wants to make sure that people know that he has a main priority. One of his main priorities, obviously, as I mentioned in the last segment, is criminal justice reform, but is also climate change and focusing on the green, a Green New Deal and, really revitalizing our entire system. That's, our entire environmental kind of apparatus, which is right now is just based on pretty much just not doing anything. Even if you talk to a lot of Democrats or hear from a lot of Democrats and ask them what they want to do, they give a lot of just very kind of surface level type ideas. They don't really want to do anything that specific and get into the details of it, because they know that if they do that too much, the Democratic Party's going to say, you can't do that. That's, you're going too far. It's going to piss off our donors. And obviously those are the people that those are the only people that the Democratic Party really even cares about. So those are the people that they're going to try and please. So when it comes to majority of Democrats out there, let alone, the ones that are in Congress, let alone the members of Congress, members of the Senate. Obviously, Republicans aren't going to do anything. But when it comes to even Democrats these days, they don't want to do anything. They just say they want to. Just like a lot of the Republicans say that, I totally care about being pro-life, but then Republicans are in support of like wars and regime change wars and bombing 7 countries, 8 countries, whatever. They don't give a shit about that kind of stuff. So just like the Democrats don't give a shit about this, but they claim to. So it's just a lot of just talk, talk. Nobody really wants to live up to any kind of standard. They just want to. Honestly, the only standard they do want to live up to is the ones that the donors set for them, not the ones that the American people set for them. So that's why Bernie Sanders, he's going up above and beyond everybody else, because he knows if you set high standards for yourself and for obviously the people that are elected you to become president, then you're going to feel the need to do as much as possible, instead of just being like, oh yeah, let me just do this little thing here, add little tweaks here and there. Oh, okay, whatever. But I mean, I'm totally progressive, even though that's just because like these idiots have claimed themselves to be progressive for so long, and then they, push forth, ideas that are not progressive, but they just keep saying I'm progressive, or I'm a liberal, or whatever it is. In reality, they're just sellouts, and they just use the labels to make themselves seem progressive, and then the ideas they put out are bullshit. But they keep repeating being what label they are, progressive or liberal, and then people believe that, and they actually think their ideas are liberal and progressive because they call themselves liberal and progressive, when in reality they're not. So, if you want an actual progressive, you want an actual leftist, you want somebody that's a democratic socialist, you look to Bernie Sanders and you look at his ideas and you look at the stuff that he's putting forth, because those are the real things that people are actually asking for.